Hey Internet, I'm Chris, and this just saved DC Comics. Hey, like I said, my name's Chris. I co-host a Bada Boom podcast with my best friend Troy, and I talk about comics a lot. And I wanted to start this YouTube channel to talk about comics a little bit more, talk about topics that I don't get to talk about on the podcast. So let's get into it. The topic I wanted to talk about today is DC Compact Comics. It's a new format DC is experimenting with where they take classic stories, put it in a manga like format, and then price it at $9.99, which is great, especially for new readers or readers like me that have classic stories they may have in a bigger format like Omnibus or an Absolute, and you just want to have something that you could quickly grab and read. Like, I'm not bringing an Omnibus on the train. I live in the city. I don't know if anyone lives in the city. And also, I don't know if you've ever carried an omnibus. It's like carrying stones in your back if you've ever done it. Have you ever done that in a signing? I've taken an omnibus to get signed at a con. And by the end of it, my back was destroyed. I probably should rephrase that.
Yo, the way you said it was crazy.
But I'm in my 30s now. I shouldn't be carrying omnibus. So to have something like this that's cheap, easy to grab, easy to read. Does it compress the art? Yes, but these are stories that I've already read for the most part, and it allows me to sort of like dive back into it. And something like this, like if you read manga, one thing I really appreciate about it is that you're able to go anywhere, and for the most part, things that are really popular, like a Chainsaw Man, like a One Piece, like a Jujutsu Kaisen, you can walk into a Barnes and Noble, you can walk into almost any bookstore, and even a comic shop, and you can find volume 1. That's this. With comics, it can be really confusing if you've ever been to a bookstore or even a comic shop, and you're like, where do I start? They're like, well, if you really like the Batman movie, you probably want to read Hush, a little bit of The Long Halloween, a little bit of this. This doesn't completely solve that. It's still a bit confusing if you're like where to start. But hey, here's a classic Batman story that's a great jumping on point at only $9.99. For someone that is trying to get in or you're looking for a gift for someone. I got into comics mainly because my uncle gave me a trade of Green Arrow Quiver by Kevin Smith and Phil Hester that I actually have somewhere here. There you go. This right here. This is my original copy. You could tell just from the yellowing. Look at the pages. But that story is what set me off on this journey to be a comic book reader. I'd always been a fan of comics. Well, comic characters because of the animated series of the 90s, like Spider-Man, X-Men the animated series, Batman the animated series. The list goes on and on. But I'd never really read comics. But having something like this, that was a great jumping on point, it was a gift, is what we kind of yearn for. But it's hard. I don't know if you've been in a bookstore, but the comic section gets more and more confusing every year. I've gone into it. I actually had to go into it to get this because New York City, I went to Midtown Comics. It was sold out. I'd seen it at my LCS, but I was like, it's Batman's Court of the Owls. It'll be in stock when I decide to buy it. It wasn't when I wanted to buy it. So I had to go to a Barnes & Noble. And that was the first time I was in a Barnes & Noble comic section in a while. But when you go into Barnes & Noble, what's really interesting is that, especially if you're my age, which is like 30, there was a time where comics had like two sort of like full aisles. Even before the comic book movie boom, you had a really strong comic section. It was a little confusing, but it was fun, you know what I mean? To pick up stories, I remember it was really fun, like when things like Civil War were popping off and I had no money to kind of buy, which kind of goes to the point of the affordability of this price point. But I would have no money. I'd go into Barnes & Noble, read something like Civil War and be like, this is awesome. Now that's kind of been overtaken by manga, which is great. I love manga. I have some manga here. When I was growing up, that section was kind of like the weird section. It almost felt like porn because it was like in a small corner of the Barnes and Noble I used to go to that was next to a movie theater in Brooklyn. And I would always go in there before seeing a superhero movie. But like the manga section, even though it had things I was familiar with, like a Dragon Ball and stuff, you kind of stood away from that section. Now, it seems like comics is the section you kind of stay away with because of all the sections in a bookstore, it is probably the most convoluted in terms of size, formats, um, starting points. It's difficult. But hopefully, something like this that DC is experimenting with, these compact comics, make it easy to make suggestions, to jump in. I've already got 3 of these. I have Batman Court of Owls, I have Watchmen, and then I also have All Star Superman. Right now, there's those 3, and then also Far Sector. I've read Far Sector, didn't love it, don't really need it, so I kept that one to the side. Maybe I'll get it eventually just to complete the set. But going back to the point of the price point and why I really love it, as someone that lives in New York City, it's great to be able to pop this open on the train. Also, I'm not too precious with it. It's been a day, 2 days since I've had this. I've already ruined it because I put it in my son's bag and it got wet. But I'm not like, oh my God, that's $30 down the drain. Oh my God, my, first edition of, or my first print of the Quarter Owls is destroyed. I'm like, you know what? I'll buy it again, or I'll just keep this one, because guess what? This is my reader copy. Now, will it save comics or DC Comics as it is, as I stated in the beginning? Probably not. In comics, there's the big 2. And DC is the 2 in that big 2. They've been losing market share, but I think a lot of that has to do with, it's the house that Batman built. There's about 90 Batman books. There's some really good stuff going on, but I think it's really hard for them to sort of elevate. Marvel has that number 1 spot. It's not like they really work for that number 1 spot, but they have it. And then Image is doing some really interesting things, along with Skybound and the Energon universe, really creating an excitement. But DC, they've sort of been in a place where they've been complacent. To be fair to them, they've been acquired a couple times over the past few years. They don't, they're not masters of their own destiny because they answer to a company that is always cutting costs, and they're always, it seems like, at a point of like they may get bought, the movies get rebooted all the time, strategies shift. It almost seems like there's no synergy. Hopefully, with James Gunn being at the head of DC Studios, there's a little bit more of that. But they're in a place where, it's hard to be a DC fan. So to have something like this that you could point to and be really excited about, and also, it could bring new readers in. It's something easy to suggest. Hopefully, when Superman comes out in about a year, you'll be able to grab your friend, All-Star Superman, and be like, read this. And they'll bring more people into the comics. And that's what it's really about. Sort of widening that audience. Because right now with comics, the issue is, yes, I'm a comic book fan, but I'm getting older. I have a kid. He likes comic books, like comic book characters, but a lot of that has to do with the movies he watches, the games that are available. Right now he really loves Spider-Man. Will he ever read a Spider-Man comic? He may never have to because of the amount of movies and games that are available. So we really have to focus on building this. And this is a start. Oh, it's upside down. Building this. Have you picked up a copy of DC Compact Comics? Let me know. And let me know which ones you pick up. Peace.